Hey there, this is Scott, startatherapypractice.com. So I gave this presentation to a group of students, of occupational therapy assistant students, and I meant to record it, but actually I think it's better presented here on this video of just a screen capture of the PowerPoint presentation, because you get to see the slides a little bit better and you get to hear me better. So what follows is the presentation that I'd love to give to therapy students. So let's go check it out. If you're interested in having me come to present this message or a similar message to your school, to your therapy school, just email me, scott@startatherapypractice.com, or head over to startatherapypractice.com/presentations. So let's go listen to the presentation. Hello, this is Scott Harmon from startatherapypractice.com, and what follows is a presentation that I give to therapy students. My wife and I are both occupational therapists, and we started a pediatric clinic back in 2006. Before then, I had worked 12 years in developmental daycares, and I was driving one way, 45 miles one way to work every day. And I decided, you know what, I want to work a little bit closer to home. But in my hometown, it's pretty small, and there was no really opportunity to work in my hometown. So I asked my wife what she thought about creating our own opportunity, our own pediatric clinic that provides therapy. So we did some preliminary market research. We asked our pediatrician if they thought there was a need, and we asked around in our town if they thought there might be a need for those services. And our pediatrician had a warm reception for that and said, yeah, I think there is a need for that, and we would actually send you some clients. So that was a very good indication that a pediatric clinic might take off. So after 12 years, we began our pediatric clinic. And this is my family right here. I'm pretty proud of this bunch right here. I have 6 children. The oldest is 20. And the youngest is 2, and that 2-year-old right there in the bottom right, she rules the roost. But that's okay. It's a great bunch of kids, and I'll give my wife ample credit for that. So my wife and I, like I said, are both OTs, and my wife was the clinic. She was our clinic. When we first opened up, I was doing contract occupational therapy at a developmental daycare, and I was able to pull away from there gradually as we built up a caseload in my clinic. Now, I will tell you that speech therapy was and still is our major provision. We provide mostly speech therapy, but we also provide OT and physical therapy in my practice. So as we began, we started getting clients, and I remember the day when we got a call, and I think we only had one client at this point. We got a phone call, and it was for a referral for a family of special needs kids. So this family had adopted 4 special needs kids. They all needed therapy. They all needed OT, PT, and speech. I thought we had hit the jackpot. I mean, we got 4 kids who needed all 3 types of therapy, and that was great. I knew that we were off to the races at that point. So my wife was a stay-at-home mom at that point. The 3 older kids were able to see us open this private practice, this clinic, and of course they had a ball just playing with all the toys and the swings and seeing the young kids come in and out. And so my wife was able to answer the phone. She was an OT. She is an OT, so she was able to speak the language, set up the appointments, and that really made it easier to transition from a full-time job into a private practice. Now, when I give this talk to students, to therapy students, sometimes a professor will want me come in. A professor will want me to come in and talk about private practice or business or entrepreneurship. And I don't give a lot of information on private practice. I do have a website at startatherapypractice.com. And I remember when I was in therapy school, I was not ready for the information about owning a private practice or even that much about administration. I was not going to go straight from school to be an administrator or to own a private practice, which is one of the reasons I started the startatherapypractice.com website and podcast. It was because at some point you're going to be ready for that if you're interested in private practice. And so I really would have wanted that tool when I started my private practice. Now, over at startedtherapypractice.com, I do have a podcast over there that you can listen to and subscribe to. I've got some free tools, some forms that I use in my practice, and I have some training videos of how to start a practice, and also once you have a practice, how to optimize that practice. My flagship tool is called the Academy of Private Practice. It's a membership community. It also is an e-course, so I have video lessons over there, and I have all kinds of resources for download. So you can check that out over at startedtherapypractice.com. Now, this is a picture of my grandma and grandpa. And I would tell you that this is me on my grandma's lap, but it's actually my cousin, but we're almost the exact same age. So this picture was taken back in 1971. I mean, look at those glasses. Aren't those great? We got to bring these horn rim glasses back. Those are awesome. And that floral print on that couch, the wood paneling. I mean, I love this picture. When I first gave this talk to a group of therapy students, I noticed on the calendar when I set that talk up that the day before the talk was my grandpa's birthday. So I really believe there is no coincidences. So I took this as a message that I should be talking about my grandpa, which is, I think, very appropriate. My grandpa was a sheet metal worker, and I remember him working. I mean, he just was always working. He was a hard worker. And since he was a sheet metal worker, he had these huge hands. I mean, he worked with his hands all day. If he shook your hand, I mean, he could crush you. But he had these huge hands, and he would come and visit my house after I had kids, and he was always working. He was working around my house, just always moving. I remember my grandpa at his house had a picture of my dad. My dad was in a three-piece suit. I mean, he had a page boy hat on. He had his briefcase in front of his house, and he was off to work. And my grandpa had that picture on his desk because he was so proud of my dad, because he had found a job that he had to wear a suit to work. My dad had found a job that was better than my grandpa's job. My grandpa was so proud of that. Now, my parents divorced when I was a baby, and my mom raised me until I was in high school, and then I went to live with my dad. Growing up in a one-parent family, my mom having minimum wage jobs, basically, we really struggled financially. Now, I was not totally aware of that as a child. I mean, I realized somewhat that I didn't have as much as my friends did, but I always had a lot of love. I mean, my grandparents here, my grandparents on both sides of my family, aunts and uncles, we had a really close family, and we still do. And so I always felt really blessed for the family that God had given me, even though financially we had to rely on food stamps and government commodity food, help from relatives, but I was always loved. In school, I got through school mostly with B's. I got a few A's. I got some C's also. And my point in telling you this is to not limit yourself because how you were raised, or because you don't have a bunch of letters behind your name as much as the other person does down the hall. All of the therapists that work for me have more letters behind their name than I do, and that's okay. Now, my grandpa in this picture died in 2007 of pancreatic cancer. And pancreatic cancer is just terrible. I mean, it will take you very quickly. Once they discover you have pancreatic cancer, it's basically too late. I remember at my grandpa's funeral, my aunt gave me one of my own business cards. And I looked at her and I was like, well, why are you giving me my own business card here at grandpa's funeral? And she explained to me that after my grandpa had died, they were going through his wallet, through his possessions, and this copy of my business card was in his wallet. He had carried it around since the time I gave it to him when I first opened my clinic. And I remember him asking for it, and he was so proud that my wife and I were able to open our own business. He really thought that was great. I remember him telling me that I was the first Harmon to graduate college, and I really reflected on that at the time. And it hit me that I had really accomplished something at that point. Now, my grandpa had a huge influence on who I am today. My grandpa had the heart of a servant, and he really liked to help people. And he was always helping people. I remember him, whether he was taking someone to church or going over to their house and mowing their lawn, cutting down a tree, visiting them in the hospital. And he just had the heart of a servant. And this lesson has benefited me and my business more than any class I've taken or the degree that I've earned. And I tell you that because as a therapist or a future therapist, you and I are in the service business. We should put others first. And if we do that, we're going to succeed. And that's how we're going to find the most joy in this world, is by having the heart of a servant. Now, my practice in my clinic, I like to hire college students to work in my clinic in the front office. And in our town here, we have a few colleges, which makes the pool of potential office workers pretty deep. I find college students goal-oriented, and they're trying to better themselves and learn and get to the next level so they make great employees. So a while back, I was noticing this young lady who was working at the grocery store that I shop at, and she had been promoted from a sacker to a checker. And she would always seem to have a pleasant disposition, and she must have been doing a pretty good job. She got promoted from checker to sacker. And I used to work in the grocery store. I was a checker, I was a sacker, and I actually worked produce, and they offered me a management position, but I was like, nope, going to OT school, and I'm going to be an OT. So I had an appreciation for what those jobs entailed, sacker, checker. And one day I was checking out, going through this young lady's line. The customer in front of me was being very rude to this young lady, to this checker. And the customer in front of me had forgotten an item. And really, the item was just right there across the aisle, very close to the checkout station. And the checker hesitated. And she was like, well, do you want me to go get that for you? And the customer was very rude, I remember. She was like, well, yeah, duh. I want you to go get it for me. Like, you idiot. Go do your job. So the checker went to get the item, brought it back, and the checker was polite throughout this conversation, throughout this interaction. She said, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. She was trying to diffuse the situation. And after the customer got done checking out, and it was my turn, the checker then began to badmouth that customer to me. Now, in the business world, this is a big no-no. You don't badmouth one customer to another customer. And so right then and there, I knew I couldn't hire this young lady to work in my clinic, because if she did that in my clinic, that would be detrimental to my clinic. I mean, you talk about bad PR. That would be very bad to have an office worker talk bad about another client to another client. So I could not hire her. And I always think if a person's talking about someone else bad to me, I know they're going to talk about me bad to another person. So in my clinic, I hire for character and how good a personality fit is going to be for that person in my clinic. This checker, she did not know that she was applying for the job that I was offering, which is my point in this slide, is that you're always applying for your next job. Employers are going to check references. They're going to ask around about any potential hires. At my clinic, I first ask all the therapists if they know the person that I'm going to interview or that I might interview. I send out that email to all of my therapists to see if they know them. Then they ask people they know if they know that person. Now, I have a pretty small practice, but the net that I cast right there is very wide. The therapy world is a very small world. So always remember that you're always applying for your next job. Now, I want to talk about your resume, and I'm not going to give you all of the details of what you should put on a resume, but I want to give you some tips. Now, I do have a download that has a list of these tips that you can go get over at startatherapypractice.com/presentations. Now, I do want to say that on your resume, more information is always better than less information. I look at a lot of resumes, and of course you have to have the usual fare on there of when you graduated, where you've worked before, any accomplishments that you've had. Now, on page 1 of your resume, it should stand alone. It should have enough information that I can get a good picture of what you've accomplished and who you are. And think of this as a car sticker. So when you go to the new car lot, on the window is a sticker. It's got a lot of information on there, but it's one page. Now, at the same time, that car has a manual, doesn't it? And that manual is thick. Now, I'm not saying you have to write a car manual size resume, but you get my point. Page 1 should stand alone. Your resume can be long. Now, on the handout, I put a couple of websites where you can get a free resume template. And if you're using Microsoft Word, it actually has templates in there. And so they have resume templates in Microsoft Word. On your resume, include a non-school email. So I keep resumes for a long time. And if you include only your school email, then I'm not going to be able to contact you down the road. On your resume, tell your story. I want to know who you are as a person, even more than I want to know what you've accomplished in school. So think about how you can tell your story on your resume. How can you differentiate yourself from the competition? I suggest you use LinkedIn, about.me, or write a blog. All of these you can do for free. Can you tell me who you are and what you like to do that will make me want to hire you? Now, in your resume, include plenty of white space. It shouldn't just be run-on paragraphs, and a template's going to help you with this. People like checklist. I mean, look at this template, this PowerPoint presentation I have now. It's just checklist. On your resume, include your picture on page 1. Ideally, it's a headshot, shoulders up in a professional looking manner. People connect with people. I'm not going to connect with the words on your page. I'm going to connect with your face and who you are personally more than I'm going to connect with the words on the page. Neurologically, our brain is wired to connect with faces. The best marketing advertising out there has a face on it, and you are inclined to look at that face. So put your picture on your resume. On your resume, put how you can be helpful to that organization. So remember, we're here to serve, and businesses want to hire solutions, not problems. How can you be helpful, and how can you serve that business, that facility? All right, I want to talk a little bit about the interview here. So I do interviews in my private practice. I did some this week, as a matter of fact. Now, we grew up in a world that's told us not to judge others. But I'm judging you from the moment you pull up in the parking lot at my clinic. I mean, I have to. I work with small kids. I have to keep their safety in mind. I'm going to pay attention to where you parked. So we used to have a therapist, and she worked for me. She was on payroll. She would always park in the first spot right in front of the clinic. Now, obviously, she was not thinking about serving her patients by doing this. So think about this. We serve children who have special needs. They might have a hard time getting in the front door. She was parking in the front spot of the parking lot. That revealed some of her character to me. Now, the good thing is, once I pointed it out to her, she was like, oh, okay. And she corrected that activity and started parking in the back of the parking lot. Now, the people who will be interviewing you will judge you by your clothes. They're going to judge you by your posture, by your smile or your lack of smile, your attitude in general. I mean, if you have an attitude of service and an attitude of gratitude, that's going to show, and it's going to impress the people who are interviewing you. Remember, people are going to hire for character and attitude. They're going to hire for those things more, really, than the skills that you have. I always tell therapists who I'm potentially hiring, especially if they're fresh out of school, that I can teach them therapy. I can't teach them good character. They arrive with that or without that. So I hire for character. I hire for how they're going to fit in my facility. Business owners want a happy atmosphere for their employees. And if they think that you won't be happy there, they're going to do you a service by not hiring you. They're also going to do their existing employees a service by not hiring you if you're not going to be happy there. Before you go for the interview, learn about the organization before the interview. So one therapist that I was interviewing actually had done some research and knew that we had put on a Fit Kids camp. This was a camp for special needs children. And they had read the article either in the newspaper or online, and they were just really impressed that we had done that. And it impressed me that they had done the research and knew that we had put that Fit Kids camp on. I suggest that you use a notebook. Bring a notebook with you. Write down what you know about that facility and bring it with you. It's okay to look at your notebook. Take notes during the interview in that notebook. So this is like an open book test. I've had students in therapy school do their clinicals with us, and they bring a notebook and are just writing notes all the time. That really impresses me when somebody is taking notes about what I'm talking about. So if you're introduced to somebody in that facility, write their name down in that notebook. Names are important. Names personalize the conversation. And also, when you meet somebody, say their name 2 or 3 times. So if somebody introduces you to Karen, you say, "Oh, Karen, so glad to meet you, Karen. I used to have an aunt named Karen, or have an aunt named Karen, or I know somebody else named Karen." And you don't have to necessarily say that you know somebody else named Karen, but you can internalize that and associate their name with somebody else you know, whether it's a TV character or somebody else they look like. Remember their name, and that's kind of a tip to remember people's name. Say their name 2 or 3 times and associate it with someone else or something else. And like I said, write down their names in that notebook, and then you can refer to it at the end of the interview. You don't want to get to the end of the interview and there's 3 or 4 people in that room and you only remember one person's name. If you can look at each person in that room, thank them for the interview, and at the same time use their name. "Thanks, Bob. It's good to meet you. Thank you so much, Bob, for the opportunity to come to your facility." Powerful stuff. People are impressed by that. During the interview, tell a couple of stories about you that demonstrates your character and your hard work. So go ahead and work on these stories right now. Memorize them, write them down, and that way you can explain to the person that's interviewing you who you are, what you stand for. Also, come up with a couple of ways of how you can be helpful to that organization. Go ahead and memorize them, write them down. Work on this right now. It's a homework assignment. Prepare for your future right now. Remember, this is an open book test. You can write down those notes of stories that you want to tell and put them in a notebook and refer to them. It's okay. You're going to be nervous, and that's okay. It's okay to take some notes and bring them with you. Now, I'm going to suggest that you do a few practice interviews with friends or family. And use different people for this, not the same person every time. And give them questions to ask, and then tell them to come up with some questions on their own to try to stump you. It's very good practice to actually do the interview process with someone live. If you don't know the answer to a question, simply say, "I don't know," but that you're willing to learn. This is going to demonstrate that you're not trying to overproduce for this interview, and that you have some humility, and at the same time that you're willing to learn. Once you follow up with, "I don't know, but I really want to learn about that. That sounds very interesting." So don't fake it. Now, in my consulting business at startatherapypractice.com, I surveyed practice owners of what potential questions they ask for people that they're interviewing. This is what's great about the internet. I mean, I have all these connections with practice owners, so I just put it out there on social media with the practice owners that I know. What questions do you ask? So here we go. What do you do in your free time? What do you do on the weekends? This is going to give the person interviewing you some insight into who you are, also about your character and what you're interested in, to see if you're going to be a good fit in their facility. What if you had a patient who said or did whatever? I mean, they're going to make it hard. They're going to come up with something crazy probably. They're going to want to see how you problem solve that. What would you do? If you don't know what to do, again, don't fake it, and always keep in mind they're looking for safety and they're looking for how you're going to make their facility look good. And if you don't know what you would do, you could just say, you know what? I'm not sure what I would do in that situation, so I'm going to go seek out the supervisor or somebody who might know. So someone posted, what do you look for in a supervisor? That's going to let them know what your expectations are of that facility. Are those real expectations? Tell me a mistake you made in practice and how you fixed it. And again, this is going to show humility, because even just admitting that you made a mistake is going to show that you're humble enough to admit that mistake. And then it's also going to show problem solving. How did you fix that mistake? Now that you've been reflective on that mistake, what's a better way to fix that mistake? Even if you didn't fix it correctly the first time, you could say, you know what? Looking back on that now, I've had an opportunity to think about it, and I think a better resolution for that problem would have been this. What's the best part of your last job? So they're going to get some insight into what you like. But I tell you what they're looking for is the next question. What's the worst part of your last job? It's going to show your character here in that if you start talking bad about people, specific people in that facility, that person is not going to want to hire you. They don't want you coming into their facility, bad-mouthing everybody and gossiping. Nobody likes a gossip, not even other people who gossip. So do not talk specifically about people, and keep it as much in a positive light about that past facility as you can. Why did you choose to go into OT? What's OT to you? I thought this next one was great. How do you apply what you learned in OT to your personal life? So how have you internalized therapy? Doesn't necessarily have to be OT. It could be PT. It could be speech. It could be whatever field of study that you're in. What interests you most about our facility and working here? So again, this goes back to some research about that facility. Are they doing something very niche, very specific that other facilities are not doing? If you know that, use that information right there. Why should we hire you? So you got to brag a little bit here. This is kind of hard because most of us don't want to brag, but think of it, you're in sales at this point. You've got to sell yourself. Tell them why you're great without being arrogant. Go ahead and practice this now. Write down the words and the terminology you would like to use in order to demonstrate to someone why you're worthy of them hiring you. I came up with this next one here. What do you know about the current healthcare climate? What do you know about the Affordable Health Care Act? What do you know about our state Medicaid or Medicaid system or Medicare? What do you know what's going on right now with policy? You don't have to know a lot, but if you know a little bit, it's going to demonstrate that you're plugged in, you're paying attention to more than just Netflix, more than just social media. You're actually trying to understand how this policy is going to affect your future. Tell me about when you disagreed with an employer or a teacher, then how you dealt with that disagreement. Now, obviously, you don't want to tell the story about the time when you punched somebody in the face because you disagreed with them. You're going to want to show yourself in a positive light, and even a little bit of humility here, especially if you later realize that in that disagreement you were wrong. People like to see a humble person. Or if you diffused that argument or that disagreement in a positive way, and now you're best friends with that person, tell that story. Write that story down right now. Where do you see yourself in 2 years, 5, or 10 years down the road? What are you going to be doing? So I hired a PT one time, and I asked him this question: where do you see yourself at in 5 years? And he said, I'm going to own a private practice. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. Good job. Just not in this town, right? So he and I are still good friends, and he has asked me about opening a private practice before. But where you want to be in 2 or 5 or 10 years It's going to demonstrate to that person interviewing you that you have a plan, that you're goal-oriented, that you want to improve yourself. Tell me how you would set up and prepare for a client who has this situation going on. Now, this is going to be where therapy school is really going to pay off. Again, don't fake it too much. You're going to know enough information on how to set up that client. But you can also say, you know what? Since I'm still fresh out of school, I know a few things to do, but I'm really going to pay attention to other people in your facility on how they're setting up for this client. I'm going to ask around for some tips. Use a little flattery here and say, you know what? I know you've got some smart people in this facility. I'm going to ask them what they would do, and I'm going to learn from them. That's what I want to do. How did you meet your spouse or your significant other? And what do they do? I like asking this question because it really gives me some insight into that person. I mean, if they badmouth their spouse, if you badmouth your spouse or your significant other, I don't want you on my team. I don't want you in my facility, because if you're going to talk bad about your spouse or your significant other, you're going to badmouth me and your coworkers. So I want somebody who has a closer relationship with their spouse, a healthy relationship, because if there is friction at home, there's going to be friction in the workspace. So I want to know that you have a good relationship and that you are supporting your spouse and that your spouse is supporting you. Now, some facilities are going to ask you to observe for more than just an hour. They might want you there for a whole day or 2 days. That way they get to know you better. And some facilities are going to ask you to come back for multi-day interviews. Even with other people, they might say, you know what, Joe's not here today and he can be here next Tuesday. Can you come back next Tuesday and we can ask you some more questions? So be prepared that that might happen. Now, I want to give you an entrepreneur's perspective on therapy. This slide says OT because the last class I did this presentation to it was a class of occupational therapists, but it can be any type of therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy. Think of therapy as your platform. So a platform is something that we work off of. And in therapy terms, in OT terms, a platform is like the theory of having proximal stability to gain distal mobility. That's what I want you to think about as therapy. Now, my platform is OT. And from that platform, I have 2 brick and mortar clinics. I have a clinic website. I have a blog. I have a YouTube channel, a Facebook page. My practice provides screenings. We do group sessions like handwriting groups for daycares. We provide dyslexia intervention. We do parent training. But as a therapist, you could also be a professor, couldn't you? At a local college, you could be a therapy professor. Now, in my practice, we're right now getting into selling physical products. And from my OT platform, I have a consulting website and a podcast over at startatherapypractice.com. So OT is where I started. That's the degree I have. But from an entrepreneur perspective, think of therapy as the axle on your bicycle tire. How many different spokes can you attach to that axle to make that tire roll smoothly with you on it down the road? So from an entrepreneur perspective, don't ever just think of yourself as a therapist, as great as that is. I mean, the therapy job that you have sought out and have achieved and will achieve is awesome in itself. It makes you great all by itself. But think of therapy as your platform. So that's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions or want to contact me, be sure to email me, scott@startatherapypractice.com. And if you'd like this presentation for your school, email me, let me know. I'd love to come to your school and give a presentation that's similar to this and to inform students about their future profession as a therapist. And thank you so much. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the presentation that I love to give to therapy students. Like I said, if you're interested in me presenting this message or a similar message to therapy students at your school or a school that maybe you're an alumni of, email me, scott@startatherapypractice.com, or head over to startatherapypractice.com/presentations. And be sure to subscribe to my podcast. It's called Start a Therapy Practice. And just let me know if you have any thoughts or interest. Like I said, email me, scott@startatherapypractice.com. Until next time, Godspeed to you and your practice.